Hello again, everybody. This is Rusty, aka William Robinson, aka Dr. Robinson, and I am the Blues Doctor. And this is my new updated podcast, The Blues Doctor Recommends, and we're glad you're here. As the Blues Doctor, I focus on the messy questions, the uncomfortable questions that most of the analysts and pundits and so forth are scared to ask because it doesn't fit their bias. As the Blues Doctor, I take a different approach. I tackle those uncomfortable problems by looking at as much factual information as I can before I make a decision. I came from a working class background. I managed to make it to college and then to medical school. And then through 40 years of being a physician, a researcher, an academician, and an administrator. So I've got a pretty good knowledge of the U.S. healthcare system at multiple different levels. So I think I bring a unique perspective to this kind of analysis. And I don't neatly fit into a left wing or right wing perspective, so you may be surprised at some of the conclusions I come to. Anyway, we still need you to like and share and subscribe and make comments and let us know when and where you're listening to this as well. It all helps with that algorithm thing, whatever that is. At any rate, with that, we'll get started. As part of our ongoing series, Who Killed Healthcare in the US, we've tried to take that big question and break it down into smaller parts so that we can discuss it in a podcast forum. This week, the Blues Doctor asks the question, what is the difference between health insurance and health care? Let's start off by defining what that means. Access to health care in the U.S. comes from many different places, including private insurance, public programs like Medicare and Medicaid, military care, veterans care, and even paying out of pocket. But the fact that we have so many different points of access to care has obscured a major point, which is that many Americans don't really understand the difference between health insurance and health care. Many of us have come to believe that there is no difference, and many politicians have encouraged that belief for their own purposes. They would have us believe that by buying health insurance, we're actually buying health care, which is not true. Health insurance is like any other insurance. It protects the buyer from suffering a catastrophic financial loss that would wipe you out after a major but very uncommon event. For example, life insurance buys financial protection for your family if you die unexpectedly. You pay regular premiums, and then if the worst happens, your family receives whatever amount of payment you have agreed upon previously. If you pay higher premiums, then your family gets a larger payout when you die. The insurance company exists to make a profit on the fact that most people want protection for their family and are willing to pay for it. The companies then depend on what are called actuarial tables, which predict how long someone is likely to live. They know, based on population data, for example, that the vast majority of 30-year-old American men will live at least 10 years, and they count on that. A slightly smaller number will live another 20 years, and so forth. They then use that information to figure out how much to charge each individual customer so that they can make a profit. They rely on the concept of pooled or collective risk, which means that if they have a large enough number of customers paying in, then they can cover the payouts to the very few who will die in any given year. If you ever took statistics and probability in school, then that's what this is based on. It's a way of predicting what percent of people will die each year and how much that will cost the company compared to how much they bring in from the premiums paid by the customers. Health insurance doesn't work that way anymore, really, although it was originally intended to. The idea of health insurance was born when healthcare was much more limited and far less expensive than it is today. The problem with health insurance as opposed to life insurance is twofold. One, it's impossible to predict the cost of health care. It's not a fixed, previously agreed to amount, as in life insurance policies. Two, healthcare costs have increased astronomically in the last 50 years. If an insurance company charged the same for a premium today as they did 10 years ago, they'd go bankrupt very quickly. So, for health insurance, premiums have to rise regularly in relation to the cost of care, or the company can't make a profit and will go out of business. Health care means the actual services that are provided, be it medicines or surgery or tests or whatever. The amount and particularly the complexity of our health care has risen astronomically, as I mentioned a minute ago. And that's a good thing for us overall, for our overall well being. Life expectancies have increased around the world, and people suffer less because they can get care that hadn't been invented 50 years ago. And that's what I mean in saying health insurance is not the same thing as health care. If we paid healthcare providers directly on a fee for service basis, we'd be paying for health care. In contrast, most of us actually pay private companies for health insurance, and in turn, those companies pay the actual providers, the hospitals, the doctors, etc. My producer, who is actually my wife, and I had a personal experience that was an example of what health insurance was intended for. When our son was born, he had pneumonia that was acquired in utero. His mother had pneumonia and it crossed the placenta, and he was born with it. He became very ill very fast and had to be intubated that day. He continued to decline and was transferred to the newborn ICU at another hospital for ECMO, and that's extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. It's like a heart lung bypass device, very complex, requires lots of one on one care, very difficult, very expensive. He stayed on that for about a week and until the pneumonia cleared, and stayed in the hospital for about a month. He's 31 now and is fine. And luckily, almost all of it was covered by my health insurance, which came through my employer, because the total bill was about $500,000 as best we can tell. A week on ECMO, longer than that in the NICU, all of the tests, x-rays, transfusions, medications, etc. And we only actually paid about $500 out of pocket. Insurance covered the rest. That's what health insurance was intended for, a serious but uncommon event that would bankrupt the individual if they had to pay for all of it. And that was early in my career, and probably it would have bankrupted us at the time. Health insurance was not intended to pay for regular maintenance type things like mammograms or even chronic illnesses like blood pressure medications. It was anticipated that those costs could be handled by the individual without going bankrupt and was therefore part of the everyday expenses of living. A result of the confusion between health care and health insurance is that the actual cost of care is hidden to some degree from the consumer. Consumers have no idea what they're actually paying for. With the example of my son, we got literally hundreds of different bills for parts of his care in the mail. We often got 10 or more per day, and this went on for 6 months. We tried to call and figure out what we were really responsible for and what to pay for, and we were told not to pay for any of it until the insurance settled it out months later. We had no idea what the actual cost of most of those services were until perhaps a year or later. It's further complicated by the fact that big insurers can simply decide how much they're willing to pay providers by virtue of their size. If a company controls tens of thousands of lives, it has leverage over a provider regarding cost, just like any other transaction. For example, if the buyer of a supermarket chain of 500 stores has leverage over the farmers, ranchers, whoever else he's buying product from. A farmer may charge $100 for 50 pounds of oranges, say. The buyer tells the farmers, well, I want 5,000 pounds of oranges, but I'm only going to pay you $5,000. The farmer is under pressure to sell, or he makes no money at all because the oranges go bad. Same thing with health insurers. So the cost of health care is a moving target due to the constant negotiating process going on. And that's the issue purely from a financial perspective. Both insurance companies and healthcare providers have to make a profit or they don't exist. They have to charge their customers enough to cover the cost of the product, which is rising constantly and completely unpredictable. What about the moral perspective? Do we as a society have some degree of moral obligation to provide health care to everyone, even those who have no money to pay for health insurance? The short answer, I believe most of us would say, is yes. We, as a community of people, are not going to allow someone to bleed to death in the street in front of our homes. At the same time, if we as a society paid for everything everybody wanted under that vast umbrella of things qualifying as health care, there wouldn't be enough to pay for police, fire, infrastructure, defense, anything else. So clearly, healthcare is somewhere along a line between being a right on one side and a commodity on the other. The problem here is knowing where along that line healthcare should exist. And does equity have a role to play here? Should someone who can't afford insurance be denied life-saving care when those of us who are wealthier routinely get it? Here's an example from my experience. A 35-year-old mother of three is referred to me for a diagnosis of cervical cancer. I recommend radical hysterectomy as treatment, explaining that she will almost certainly be cured by the operation, but if she does nothing, she will probably die within a year or two. She has Blue Cross insurance coverage, and I'm not picking on Blue Cross, that's just the first name that came to mind. And we quickly schedule her operation at a well-known local hospital. On that same day, another young mother comes to me with a similar diagnosis of cervical cancer, and I make the same recommendation, radical hysterectomy. But she has no insurance because her husband was laid off and they lost coverage. So the hospital wants $10,000 up front, and they will charge her an additional $20,000 after the operation. Then what happens? I could waive my fee, and I did, but it wouldn't make any difference because everything else at the hospital has to be paid for. She eventually went to a so-called indigent hospital that was in another part of the state, and I lost track of her. The answer to our initial question, therefore, is that there truly is a difference between health insurance and health care. We have allowed the politicians, the employers, and others to blur that difference for their own purposes. The result is that we as an American society are asking the wrong questions. We ask for insurance when what we really want is health care. The insurers go along with that confusion because it protects their profits. The politicians go along with it because the insurers donate to their campaigns. And the dysfunctional cycle continues. As always, I encourage questions and comments. I really want to hear what you're thinking. Next week, we're going to start looking at alternatives to the current system, with the question of the week being, do we need health insurance at all? It's still Mardi Gras this week, so we've included a little more Mardi Gras music as well as some other cool stuff I've heard at the clubs recently. And that's about all we have this week. Please keep spreading the word about the podcast. We'll be offering more t shirts with the Blues Doctor logo soon, so let us know if you want one. Anyway, as I usually say at this point, please watch next week's podcast. Okay? See you later.